Today we're going to be looking at how to do an MVC structure on the XNA sample tutorial that we'll be doing for development. And so we're going to create a new project for that. So in order to do so, we're going to go to our Visual Studio land and we're going to close the existing project. We're going to make this brand new. So we're going to go File and go to New and make a new project. And it's going to be a Windows game. And we find that under here under the Visual Studio on the Visual C# language, choosing an XNA Game Studio 4 and choose Windows Game. And we're going to give it a better name than Windows Game 1. Crazy concept. And we're going to go ahead and call this the Morning Shooter. It's storing its location inside my Visual Studio 2010 folder of my Documents folder. And we're creating a brand new solution for this. And we'll deal with our source control and stuff for this later. We'll be adding this to GitHub as we go along with that, so no big deal for that. We've been using that before. And again, make sure you choose the Windows game format. And we're using this for Windows, not for Xbox 360 at this time. We'll do an Xbox 360 one later. And so by default, when we simply just open up our project, maximize our font here a bit so we can read it. We have on our project right here, we have a blank structure. There is no structure we've been using in Java. It just creates code automatically for us and dumps it in the root directory. However, we want to have a better structure for our code. And so in the environment that we're going to be using for Visual Studio, we're going to keep our same model view controller structure that we've been using. To do that, we're going to go ahead and go to our project listed right here. We right click on it and we choose Add, and we're going to add a new folder. And keeping with the naming conventions of C# land, we're going to start with a capital, so we'll have this be controller. And then guess what? We'll also add in model and view. So right click up here again, add, new folder, model, right click add, new folder, and view. So we'll be using our model view controller structure. Now if you notice right here on our namespace, namespace takes the same existence in C# land that package does in Java land. And so I have namespace morning_shooter_game. It auto replaces the spaces that I put inside my project with an underbar. That's great. However, we have right here, we have no idea what package we're in or what structure we're in. In this case, what namespace we're in. And so we're going to look at this game object. Our game object is like our controller that we've been using inside our app controller we've been using inside our Java projects. So we're going to put this into our controller package. All we have to do is we take game1.cs and we drag it into the controller folder. Oh, that's nifty. However, we have no reference as to where it belongs in the controller folder inside our code. So to do that, we have to manually add that in right here. So we're going to go to Morning Shooter and then type in .controller and save. No big deal. And if we double click on program.cs and maximize the font on this, oh, now my game1.game, it's not finding that. It doesn't see where it is because I've moved it into the controller package or a controller namespace. So I have to add that here as well and moving this into the controller namespace as well. So .controller for the program.cs. The program.cs is the equivalent of our runner in our Java projects we've been doing all year. And even though it's in the namespace itself right here by name, it's not in there by actual visuality or where it is located in the code. So let's manually move it there as well. Program.cs, move it to our controller package or our controller namespace by folder as well as by name. So this way we keep track of it so it's adjusted both in code with the specified namespace and by location so our code isn't just around inside our folder. We want our package to be clean and organized so we can look at these, make the changes to our code, look at it and understand where things are. And so our controller namespace has within it our game1.cs, which is the name of our game. And I could even change this to be a better name right here. I could change game1. Instead of calling it game1, we could call this shooter game and have it adjusted accordingly. So if I right click on this and I choose rename, and instead of game1.cs, I will call this shooter game.cs. And I'm renaming my file. Would you like to rename its references at all from game 1? Well, yes, I would. And so now I have shooter game is a new shooter game. Again, a little bit more organized than simply calling it game1.cs. It is our shooter game.cs. Again, we want to keep the idea that our name choice reflects not only what it is, but what it does. And we put both of those inside our controller namespace. We've got them in there. Let's go ahead and hit save on all of that. And again, let's run our application and see what happens just by default. We run it by pressing either the F5 key on our keyboard or by pressing the lovely green button inside our Visual Studio environment. And oh no, I have a noticeable graphics card was found. This may happen if you, like me, are developing this on a Mac box running a virtual machine of Windows, or if you are developing this on a machine that doesn't have necessarily the highest end graphics card. To fix that, we go ahead and press OK, getting past that lovely error. We go up here onto our project, Morning Shooter Game, right click on it, and choose Properties, which brings up this lovely window right here. And on this first tab, the XNA Game Studio tab, we choose the option to select Reach for a game profile, aka we want to make it so we can have this run on lower level machines or machines that aren't running Windows natively, like this one. We hit save again. We don't have to worry about anything else inside our properties for our project right now, so we'll just close that out. Hit the F5 key or press the play button yet again. And we have the standard default Windows game using XNA, the blue screen, with no mouse support for you guys. That's pretty fantastic.
Make a mouse for it.
I, however, don't like the blue screen by default. So I'm going to go back to my program.cs. I'm not going to be using this again. So I'm going to close it because it's done. It's like my runner. The only thing I need to do to that is add possibly some more documentation if I want to, but I don't. I'm going to go down to my program.cs, shooter.game.cs. I'm going to scroll down here to my draw method. My draw method right here has the graphics device.clear and pass a cornflower blue as its default color. Not my favorite color ever. And so I'm going to backspace that out, color dot, and let's replace this. Well, you did dark khaki this morning. That was kind of boring. Dark olive green. That sounds like a remarkably bad color. Let's choose it.
What?
Dark olive green. And hit play again. There is my amazing game. Yes, that does look a little bit like a green olive. This is pretty fantastic. Okay, so we'll close that off. Now, we've got a couple things I want to show you inside the Visual Studio environment before we start fixing code, because the code that is given to us does not meet my standards for good level code, much less excellent code that I expect from all of you. So a couple things we have for tools inside this. We have the magic power of some nifty keystrokes. If we do Control-M, Control-O, we will minimize all of our code. Control-M, Control-O. So again, it's the Control-M and the Control-O key. And so if I maximize all of this right here, I right-click on that. I can go to outlining, and I can go to, not collapse all definitions, but I want to toggle outlining. So I'll just go boom, and I'll open it all up. But Control-M, Control-O collapses all of that outlining into some nice, lovely little chunks right there. Nice little feature we can look at later. And to toggle again, I can right-click on it, go to outlining, and toggle is Control-M, Control-L. So Control-M, Control-O collapses, Control-M, Control-L opens it all if it's all closed. Great little tool right there. Great.
Control-M, I think it's Control-M is opening just one.
Control-M will open just one. Fantastic. So we've got Visual Studio as a tool has some great features for looking at just chunks of code. Go ahead and we can close that output screen. We don't need to see that right now. I can even close the error list right now. Give us more code space. The other thing I want to show you is up here in this top right bar. This gives me access to every method / constructor inside the class I'm currently in. I click on that drop down. I can then immediately go to any method I wish. And very fast, takes me right to it. It's arranged alphabetically right here, regardless of the order of the code in this. So it's very easy to find things inside my project. So if I know the name of it, I can visually just go right here. Rather than trying to scroll through and find it, I can just click on this and go to that section. So that's the a search tool that's built into that. The left search tool gives me information that's in more for specific pieces of that. We'll take care of that later. Over here on the right is our Solution Explorer. Our Solution Explorer is similar to our Package or Project Explorer we were using in Eclipse. This is where we have references to all of our project stuff. Right here, inside my project, I have my lovely little morning game right here, and I have this content folder, and my content folder did not import properly. Dub.
That's bad.
That's okay. we can deal with that. We'll add our content references to that properly. Morning Shooter Game 2 projects. Let's pause for a second. Let's find out where that is. So getting back onto this, the reason we don't have any content in there is because I forgot that I had actually at the very beginning of this project simply created a brand new project. So I'll have to actually add some folders in. No big deal. We'll take care of that in just a moment. So we'll actually take care of that and add the project contents back into here. But let's go ahead and let's take a look at our structure for the game so we can build this and get it going. So we're going to go ahead and look at our tutorial that Microsoft gives us that I feel is inadequate. So we have right here inside this, it says that we want to add a new file in there called player.cs. And we want to make sure that we name this like it says in regular case, where it's the capital first letter and then lowercase additional letters as necessary. It doesn't unfortunately show it to you properly right here inside the little copy paste land. But before we do that, we want to look at the fact that we have inside our default, we have some fixes we need to make to our visibility of our code. So if I go back up here to the very top of my file in my declaration section, that graphics device manager and that sprite batch object should be private. So private right there and private right here. Again, keeping the visibility of the data members private unless absolutely necessary. We will talk about the data members that need to be public because they will not work with a property in just a second inside player.cs. So we'll save that right there when we look at properties. So we're going to go over here to our model namespace because a player is a thing that we are modeling in our game, separate from our controller, and not what we're looking at either. So we're going to go to our model package, and we're going to add a new file, right-click Add, and it's a new item. Control-Shift-A will also work. And instead of class1.cs, no, we will call it player.cs. And we have that lovely chunk of code that automatically comes with it. You can see that by when I right-clicked and created it inside the folder, that automatically gave me the correct namespace of morningshootergame.model. So by creating it inside the folder automatically, you get the correct namespace on it by default as well. However, if you notice, when it creates the visibility of that class, it doesn't give it a visibility. We need to make our visibility specified by default on our own manually. Sorry, not by default. So we need to make our visibility of our classes public. This will come back and bite you if you don't do it. So make sure when you create a class that you properly set its visibility when you create it. Otherwise, you'll notice that, oh crap, it doesn't work. And that's always a bad thing. So let's go ahead and take care of that. So we make a public class player and then Control S to save because saving is a great thing to do. We go back over to our tutorial and hey, here's the code to put in it. So we want to change the using statements that are to unspecified. So I grab those, copy it, and replace the existing using statements with them. Using statements are the equivalent of Java of an import statement. So in this case, I'm using System, XNA Framework, and XNA's Framework for graphics. Those are the pieces that we have to have for a player object. No big deal, pretty standard. We have our constructor of our public class player, so let's go ahead and let's grab our components right here. And it says we need 3 methods to go in this: initialize, void, and raw. So those methods that they give us to us by default are blank. We're going to be replacing them quite soon with some more valid information. They're just giving these as placeholders, so we know that we need to have them in there. Again, noting over here on the right that I have access to all 3 of my methods and any constructors that would exist inside that as well. And those are specified. I can just immediately go to them as default by looking there on the far right. We're looking back at our tutorial. We go back down a bit, and here in this gray section, we have some code. And we're going to grab this code out of there. You guys can read the tutorial in more detail as you like as we go through this. But right now, we're going to just do some pulling and pasting right there. So we're going to take that out of there, go down to the top of our file just like we do normally, and put it in our declaration section. We're going to examine this code now a little bit more closely. So to do so, let's maximize the font a bit so we can read this a bit better. And we have some data members up here. We have a public texture 2D object, a vector 2 position object, a bool, an int, and a width, and a height. Now if you notice that this public int height looks like a data member with that part of its declaration, but then it has squiggles attached to it, where it does get squiggles return player texture.height. This is what is known in C# as a property. This is how you write a getter and setter in C# land compared to a getter and setter in Java. You simply declare the visibility, which for a property will always be public, And then the name of that property will be a capitalized version of the lowercase variable. Since the height is dependent on something else, aka the player's texture, there's not a lowercase int height that belongs to this because it's belonging to something else. We'll take care of that in just a second when we fix active. A getter is then specified by the keyword get, squiggles, and then we simply return the value that we want to return for that, a semicolon and a closing squiggle. And those are all enclosed within these squiggles right here for that property. So we're going to fix this with our active data member. Our active data member should be a lowercase a because it's a data member, and its visibility should then be private. But we will need access to that value externally. So we'll need to make a property for it. To do so, we're just going to create it right here, and we'll write a comment for it. Accessor, actually we'll do this the right way in a second. And so it's going to be public, and it's a bool type, and its name is active with a capital A. No squiggles. No squiggles, no parens, because it's not a method call, it's simply the accessor for it, or property. And then inside that, we're going to create a getter and setter for the active data member. The getter, again, we use the keyword get. We then do squiggles, and we return active, semicolon, and a closing squiggle. For the setter of the active on the player, the keyword is set, again, squiggles, and then we say active equals value, closing squiggles. Now, did I have a parameter up here? No. The property structure of C# means you would simply say active equals something, and that would then assign that value that you call it, when we do that later, into the actual data member active right here. So it's an implied parameter. We don't have to send it or anything. We'll see how we call it in just a bit. It's just that whatever value is assigned to this property will automatically be assigned into that data member. So we've fixed this data member for that. Our public vector2 position. Because vector2 position, vector2 is a struct, we cannot use a property on it. So our vector2 is going to be remaining as simply this public value because it is a struct. A struct is a holdover from C. It's not truly an object. It looks like one, but it doesn't talk like one. It's definitely not a duck either. It's a special little case that it uses for storing information. And so it will not have a data member on that. However, we can go ahead and make a data member for our texture 2D. That's a class, so we can make make this one private and make that a lowercase p, and then make a property for it, public, not public, and it's a texture 2D, and its name is player texture. Again, the only difference on the property and the data member is a capitalized first letter, like a method, and then get, squiggles, and return the data member. Make sure that you specify it with the right case. You don't want to call a recursive call in your property assignment. And then again, for the setter, all you do is set the data member name equals value, regardless of what kind of type it is. It's just that equals value. So you have a data member, its property. A data member that, because it's a struct, does not get one, so we'll keep that one public because of its visibility style. A data member private, public property. We'll fix it also for int. So we have our public int health, which would be our property, and then get parens return health, semicolon, squiggle, set, squiggle, health equals value, squiggle. And that should be lowercase because I didn't fix that right. Let me fix that here. And make my private data member for it. So I have a private data member of type int with a lowercase h for health, a public data member of type int with a capital H for health for its property. Because the width and height are calculated, I don't need to have individual properties for those because those belong to that player texture object. And so I've now adjusted my code so I have visibility for both my class done properly. My data members have the correct visibility attached to them with a property for all the ones that I can use it on. Because vector2 is of type struct, I do not use a property on it. I simply just pass that as a struct. So we'll just keep that one in play. Hit save because we like to, because saving's our friend. We go back over to our code, and it talks about that some more, saying what these are. We don't need to worry about that right now. And it says, hey, that initialize method really doesn't do anything. Let's replace it with the correct initialize version. So we're going to go ahead and grab this code, copy pasta, replace initialize with this more complete initialize. And so this one takes a texture 2D called texture, a vector 2 called position, and player texture equals texture. Now I can do just like I do in Java, where I could do this dot player texture and change this to be player texture.
Does it matter?
That will work the same. So this dot player texture, not player texture. So this works just like it does in Java, where I can have the data member name, or the parameter name right here, and use this dot on that, so I assign it specifically to the player texture variable. I can also use inside the object its property, because just like in Java, where I can use a method or the data member for it itself, same thing. I can use a property, or I could just call the getter and setter, or I can call it simply the data member. Since it's inside the class, the visibility is fine. That's just totally up to you. Vector2 position, because position equals position. Vector2 we're passing it as a struct, and it doesn't allow the property to be used for that. That's why we're using it like this. Active equals true. I could either have that be the use right here where I'm using the property active, or I could change it to be the data member active, both of which are completely valid. I can use the getter / setter method of the property, or I can simply use the actual data member itself. Both are valid ways to do this. Hit save because we want to save it. And so initialize again is replacing our constructor. We use the initialize method instead of our constructor when we are calling these, just as an FYI. Okay, talks about it right there some more. Move past that, you read that on your own. We're going to replace our draw method with this big huge chunk of code. Our draw method right here, if you notice, the draw method is actually just a single line of code with 8 parameters. So the draw method right here, this is one of 7 different versions of the draw method. So it passes the texture, position, null, color.white, 0f, vector2.0, 1f, spriteeffects.none, and 0f. We'll see what those different parameters mean later when I have you play around with your code. You can have status effects happen here inside this. You can make it so you can make some, like say for example, you have an ill character. By changing the color.white, instead of having it'll put a colored filter on that picture. So say for example, you make something sick, you make it so it's a green filter on it. A good status effect, you make it so it's all purple. And make it so it's a purple version of that thing. Okay, we'll deal with that later. So we've got that ready to go. So that's our draw method given to us. And then we need to go ahead and we need to change game1.cs. We need to add some components. So if you notice looking at his, it just says adds a player, but look, there's no visibility attached to that. So we'll grab that code. That's nice and lovely. But we're going to say that player is what visibility? Private. And we rename game1.cs to be shootergame.cs. So we're going to go up here into our data member section, paste that in, and we have a represents player, but we'll make a private player object called player. And oh no, I don't know what a player is. I've got this orangish underline of doom. Whatever shall I do? Well, we have up here, in this lovely chunk up here, this using section. That's where we would deal with our imports in Java land, and our using section acts just like imports in C# land. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the model package for that. So to do so, we type in using, and then we type in the package morning_shooter game dot model. and a semicolon to close that off. And hey, look, my error under player went away. Now I can also do this using your keyboard way to do this. I move my cursor over player. I get this lovely little symbol right here. Looks like a broken piece of code. Get my cursor to highlight on it. That broken code. Options to help fix this. I click on the down triangle, and hey, using morningshooter.game.model. That tells me what I need to use, so I can click on that and add my using statement. So I can do it there, or I can simply type it in. A couple different ways to do that. So we've got our player added to that. So we have a player object in there. We have a player in there. Let's go see what other code we need to add to this. Oh, we need to initialize it. So player is a new player. So we call its constructor inside the initialize method, and the initialize method is called by default. So inside our initialize method, above the base.initialize, we call player equals new player. The initialize method is going to be called by the game on its own after the player has been initialized. So we use the constructor to call it, and then the work happens inside the initialize method. So we save that right there. We're good to go. And then we need to add some information for our load content. Our load content in C# for games is how we get stuff like, say, images, pictures, backgrounds, that kind of fun stuff. And so to do that, I'm going to grab this chunk of code, copy that, and I'm going to put that into load content after sprite batch is a new sprite batch. Make sure you put it after sprite batch is a new sprite batch. It's important to actually try and draw things once you started the sprites drawing. Now, looking over this line of code right here, I have my player vector2 player position is a new vector2 object, or excuse me, vector2 is a struct, new vector2 struct, where I give it this information. And then I call my player.initialize. Hey, that's that method we said we would call afterwards, and that happens inside our load content. And this is where I pass it the texture I'm giving to it, as well as its position. So this is going to happen once a game. The initialize method only happens once. And right now, it's looking for a file called player. Again, notice that we did not, since we started this project by default, we don't have that all that content that belongs to this. So I need to add some content to this. And so I'm going to need to add some existing items. So I'm going to go ahead and grab existing items. And it's looking for all my stuff right here inside that, which means I need to put the stuff in the right file. So let's go ahead and grab that first. So let's go to my folder right here, where I unzip that. And in my downloads folder, I have my shooter project windows.zip. And inside that shooter folder, there's the shooter content folder, all the content that goes to that. So I'm just going to copy that folder out and place it on my desktop. Copying all my items. There we go. So inside that shooter content folder, I have a whole bunch of stuff. I have some pictures, I have a font, I have a laser, some backgrounds, and a shooter content .content proj. So I'm going to take this whole folder and place it inside that lovely location right here. So I'm going to just take that folder, and I'm going to go to my projects, which are inside my documents, and I'm going to go to my Visual Studio projects, and I'm going to go to my projects folder. And then I have in here, I have a morning shooter, I believe, morning shooter game, and my morning shooter game file right there, morning shooter game content, and this is where all my stuff should have been, was inside here. So I'm just going to take that stuff that I just had, since I did it wrong way, so let's go grab that and just grab the contents of it. Shooter content, Control A, Control C, back, and paste. Cancel. It just took a while for it to paste. No worries. So I have right here my morning shooter game content.proj, shooter content.proj. We can get rid of that. We don't need that stuff in there. That was an extra file because that was the one that we just copied and pasted over. So we'll go ahead and delete that. And we want to remove that. Yes, I do. And I want to go over here. So I've added those that content in my folder to that. I'm going to go ahead and I want to add those existing files to this. So right click, add an existing items. And in my content, here's all that stuff. So I'm just using the magic of the control key. Click on a whole bunch of things to select them all. So I added my sound folder and all those images. I'm going to say add. And I now have a bunch of pictures, a sprite font, and there should be a sounds folder in there. That was weird. So morning content, let's make sure we add my sound file in there. Add existing item. Let's try it this way. Try doing that. There's my music, but it didn't put it in the folder, so let's add a folder in there. That's easy to fix. We'll just make it happen. We can make things happen in this class. We're amazing. So add new folder, but we're going to have a sound folder. I'm going to call it sounds actually because I like the word plural better since we're going to be playing different sounds. And I'm going to have an images folder. And just because I can, I'm going to add a fonts folder as well because if I want to change my font more than once, I'll have a plural for fonts. And so all of my pictures I could put in one, all of my animations I could put in one, all of my sounds I'll put in the right folder. So my explosion.wave and my laserfire.wave and my menu music.mp3 and my game music.mp3 will go in my sounds folder. Hey, in my images folder, all of my PNGs. Doop. Doop, doop, doop. Da, da, da. Put all those pictures into my sound images folder. And then my font would go in my fonts folder. There we go. So now I have access to my different pieces. And it's a little bit more organized. Why do this? Keep my code a little bit nicer and cleaner. So I have over here, if I look in my images folder, again that's alphabetic is the way it'll show up right here. I have this thing called player.png. I double click on it, and hey, there's that little ship that we saw earlier on screen on the little web page. That's a great little picture of a ship. It's a little, kind of a bit of a, steampunky spaceship thing. Okay, we can handle that. Now, you can't edit anything in there. That just lets you either maximize or minimize it. It's not an editing tool. That's okay. We're gonna
shows you the actual size.
Yeah, the actual size of it. But if you notice, it's called player.png, but I'm referring to it here as just player. Ah! But since I moved that into the images folder, I'm going to go right here in front of image player and type in images slash. So it tells me to go to the images folder first and then the player folder. Or player file, excuse me. So I'm going to look at my content, look at my images folder, and look for player.png. Again, I'm not specifying the extension on it, simply just the name of the file. So you'll want to keep that in mind that since we're making those changes to our code as we follow this tutorial, that we're going to make those changes to that. So keep making sure you adjust that accordingly. If you're adding a picture, you look for your images folder. If you're specifying a sound, you refer to your sounds folder. If you're specifying a font, you refer to your fonts folder. Ah, craziness. So we'll hit save. Take a look at our tutorial again, see if there's anything else we need to do. Ah, yes, there is. In the draw method, we need to say, draw the player, and add the lines to draw the sprite batch, and in the sprite batch. Now, this is kind of important. This will be a big deal later on. You can't draw before the sprite batch.begin is called. So, make sure any draw methods happen here after begin. All drawing happens after .begin is called. Kind of a big deal. No drawing before begin. If you try and draw before begin or after end, you get stupid things happening. Crashing, burning, pain, suffering, all this bad stuff that Yoda warned you about. Terror, hate, fear, anger, yeah. Bad, bad stuff. Okay, and so it says it should be good to go. So let's go ahead and hit our F5 key or our play button.
It's there.
I run my game, and I should see a cute little steampunky shooter thing. Wait for just a second. There we go. Build progress.
It's beautiful.
Hey! And look, it looks like it has little whooshes. That's so cool. So I have my whooshing on my green background because I don't like cornflower blue. But I have no response to my keyboard. It does nothing. That's actually something you're going to have to add yourself.
Yeah, it's because you didn't tell it to do something. It's there.
Yeah, it just draws at that spot, and that's all it does. So we're going to go ahead and we'll close this. One of the things that I recommend you do specifically is inside your update method. So right here where it says if gamepad.getState playerIndex1.back equals buttonState.pressed, this.exit, I recommend that we add to this a way of closing the game via keyboard. Because we're not always going to be we haven't been using our gamepads yet. We do have gamepads to develop with here in class. But right now we don't have them out and about. And so we want to make it, and rather than having to always have to go up and click and close it, it's really nice to be able to close it automatically by pressing a keyboard. So again, to do that, I'm just going to add an OR statement right here, an OR clause, boom, boom, and then I tab in a bit, and a set of parens. So either I press my back button, which is great, or I do keyboard.getState parens dot is key down, and I pass it keys dot, and let's see, I had G last time, it looks like. I'm going to say that the good key to close my game will be the J key.
That's fast.
And so now when I press my J key, or close that. I need a closing parens. I need to match an opening parens up here. There we go. So make sure your parens match. So if gamepad.getState player1 is pressing your back button, or I press my J key, or my Q key, my W key, my escape key, whatever I want to press, I will close it and it exits the game.
That OR is in the middle of there.
Make sure you have opening parens up here.
Oh.
And so now if I press my J key, my app will close. So opening parens, because this first parens takes care of this chunk of code. This opening parens then surrounds this one right here that is identified with that. So this.exit closes the app. Again, exit is a super method, so we don't, or a base method, we don't have to write it ourselves. It's one that we are calling on the base class of game.cs from XNA. So we've got that right there. So we look over at the next step of our tutorial is we want to take player input. And so we want to go through and do this. As this page pulls up right here, and I'm going to have you guys continue working with this, if you notice right here, there's part 2, get deep. You have animating the player, drawing the background, adding the enemies, calculating collisions, shooting things, and then making things explode, playing some sounds, adding healths and checkpoints, and then going further. The going further is your end goal for this. You should have that before the end of the week. Probably by tomorrow will be my guess that you can have that done. Tomorrow in class meeting, Wednesday, where you can get that done so you can actually have it so that you have added 2 different weapons to your project. Animating the player is just going to be adding your animations to this so you can actually deal with animation on that. Drawing the background will be adding the background. Your animation and your background drawings will belong in your view namespace. Your enemies will be a model namespace object. And then your, everything else will just be referring to existing code and adding method calls. So as you build through that, your weapons happen in your model class. If you add like those extra weapons, that's what will be happening in this finish and going further. Those will also be in your model namespace. So I'd like you to continue going on with this. As you go, just to deal with input right here, a couple things to keep in mind. Since no one has a Zune, oh wait, they don't exist anymore. Well, basically. This line right here, you don't have to worry about. Using Microsoft XNA framework info.touch. No one has a Zune, so don't worry about that. And then any line attached to the .touch interface also does not need to be implemented. So that using statement right here, and then over here inside this, where the touch panel dot enabled gestures, we don't have a touch panel because we don't have a Zune, so this line doesn't work. And this would also work if you had Windows Phone 7.5 or previous. No one has those either. So these two lines of code, touch panel dot enabled gestures, or using Microsoft input.touch, don't need to be taken care of. Everything else, though, just go and directly copy and paste the code directly from that. It's just, there is no input.touch. No one has a Zune. No one has Windows Phone 7.5 or previous.
Somebody has an emulator put on here.
Yeah. And the touch panel enabled gestures, we don't have to worry about that either. Those will all be taken care of separately, so we don't have to worry with that. And everything else, you just go through and add that code to the class as necessary. Now again, I renamed my class to be Shooter Game instead of Game1.cs. So just keep that in mind if you made changes to that as well, that Game1.cs will be the equivalent of your Shooter Game project. Any questions before I let you guys work on your own for the last 20 minutes of class? No? Okay. So again, keep using your MVC structure. Your view will get a couple components, namely your animation, your background will go inside that. Your code is already referenced right here for this. Keep that going. If you have questions, please feel free to ask first your neighbors, check the page itself again, and then ask me.